Welcome to another episode of Live Your True Story. This is Mio Ikro, and today we are joined by Jenny Heijun Wills, a fellow queer Korean adoptee who is also a memoirist, among other things. She's a brilliant professor in Canada, and there's just something about talking to other people from your community, different questions that you ask, different, more advanced places you can go because you already share this common understanding and don't have to explain super basic stuff to each other. And so it was a real pleasure to connect with her. She does have a set of essays coming out in the US. She had a set of essays come out in the US. I am recording this in the past because I'm going to be in the jungle. But you can pick that up. I'm going to put all links and all that good stuff on the Substack, as well as links for some of the other authors and other books that she speaks highly of in our conversation. We had done a panel with Nicole Chung, another Korean adoptee who has written memoir. And it was for this bookstore in Boston, and I guess they migrated platforms, and ours was not one of the conversations that survived. And so I thought, well, that's kind of a tragedy. So I tried to get the gang back together, but I think Nicole is a bit busy, maybe with personal things and professional things. She has a lot of responsibilities, I believe, at different publications and so forth, and also just maybe writing her, I don't know, at this point, third or fourth book. But Jenny and I were able to get together, and she's so fun. And I always really cherish and appreciate the time and the thoughtfulness, the intelligence that she's able to bring into the space, especially since we could really nerd out on writing, you know, just the things sort of beyond the adoption space. She's very well versed in decolonization, which in Canada is kind of at another level. I mean, they did some real gnarly stuff to their Native First Nation population as well, but a lot more of their First Nation population survives. And so it's kind of, when I read about that population, to me it's sort of like a mix of America's Native and Black population, because there's just not a whole lot of Native Americans left in that respect, and they were disenfranchised in such a different way. Colonization takes many terrible forms. She brings a lot of wisdom, a lot of care to this conversation, a lot of fun, and it was like a marathon. We were both pretty tired by the end of it, but it was like, I don't know, it was an important conversation. It was a fun conversation, but it was a difficult conversation. It's just like, man, we are, especially her, since she's the one being interviewed, it's like, yeah, she's having to like think, like all, you know, pistons are having to fire. And these questions that are about things that she feels are important and in no way should be responded to flippantly, and also things that she's never thought about. And so it's kind of like, I have to think about that. But she's a class act. She's also just a really wonderful person. She's maybe a thought leader, and she's also very humble and very aware of other authors who are doing important things, saying important things, and moving outside of that sphere, right, and giving credit where credit is due. So many Korean adoptees stay within the Korean adoptee sphere. Many adoptees stay within the adoptee sphere. And it's just like, it's metaphor. Get out, you know, get out there. There are other people who don't look like you and don't have your same legal experience, but they're your brothers and sisters, man. So in any case, I always love talking to people who have this level of training and have taken the time to be so thoughtful and considered about things, because that's kind of their job, and yet come out of it being so kind and human. And for some reason, that is not part of the training of most professors, from what I have found. It's an academy. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation, whether you're a writer or interested in adoption or just gay and living for some Koreans, talking about how snatched our ancestors are as they age. And yeah, so thanks again so much for joining. And I'm very pleased to present to you Jenny Heijun Wills. Hey there.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. Good to see you. I love
Yeah.
your background there. It looks like
Oh, thank you.
it
It's
can't be real. It looks like one of those green screen like.
I did it in AI. It was my first delving
Oh,
into
for real?
AI.
Okay, it looks
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing. It looks cool. It's perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and chatting. It's
Thanks for
it's so
having
great to have these conversations, right? Where there's all these sort of unique aspects to the self that are shared.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then also being available for a wider audience
Yeah.
to give a glimpse into our worlds. Like we're both writers, both Korean adoptees. I believe you are in the LGBT
Mhm.
spectrum there
Yep.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
The Rainbow Mafia or like the alphabet crew, however you want to say.
yeah, and raised in North America
Yeah.
for
Absolutely.
better,
Yeah.
or for worse. And also, I think you're more academic. You are actually a professor. You actually went through the
I
grueling.
mean, don't hold it against me. I try so hard to resist those qualities. So
Well, I always say, academia, right? It's like it's an institution, and people who go through it are sort of institutionalized, especially the people who never knew life outside of it.
totally. Yeah, absolutely. It's like all other sort of nationalist minded things. It decides who belongs, who doesn't, and what the parameters for exclusion are, really.
Yes, and that exclusion is in the area of knowledge. What gets to be counted as knowledge?
Yeah, knowledge, accessibility, class, race, gender, all those things. But knowledge, I think, is the smokescreen that all of these things present themselves to be in the name of. But yeah, totally.
Well, I actually just interviewed another Canadian. Her name is Paulette Steves. I don't know if you're aware of her.
No, what province is that person from?
She's, I don't know originally, but she's currently in Manitoba.
Oh, work. Okay,
She's
same.
oh yeah?
Weird.
Oh
Yeah.
man, you guys got to get together. She's so cool. She's older
Hmm.
and she's an indigenous archaeologist and
Okay.
she is rewriting the history of humans.
Amazing. Wow.
So,
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll look
yeah.
up that person because I'm sure we're in the same city then.
Yeah, she's amazing. And I think a lot of what she brings has a lot of wisdom that's super applicable to adoptees.
Absolutely.
So, like, let's start off generally,
Sure.
and I want to ask you what's different for you talking to another adoptee writer versus other interviewers?
Hmm. Hmm. This is a great question because I think that it's something that one often reflects on after the interview happens. It's like this almost, not to be glib, but like this like drive by like emotional like foundation that you recognize has happened like long after. Um, but what I notice is that there's certain things that are taken as fact and a foundation is already, existent in terms of what I consider for our community often to be commonplace knowledge. So it's not typically the questions of like, what was it like? People don't ask what I think is like one of the most triggering questions, like what do your adoptive parents think about the work that you're publicly doing? People don't ask that kind of stuff. They really center the experiences of adopted individuals and formerly fostered individuals, but in a way that presumes that critical adoption 101 has already been taken. We're like in grad school already when it comes to this stuff. And so we don't have that educational burden the same way, or at least the questions aren't geared towards insisting upon an educational burden for maybe a less familiar audience. The expectation, I think, is that people who are unfamiliar level themselves up on their own before they come to the conversation or inspired by the conversation, but not through the conversation.
Yes, there's less emotional labor or labor, emotional and otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
But also more emotional, like there's a different emotional like vibe that can happen because as you know, not that we're necessarily like trauma bonding, but a lot of the conversations I think dig deeper into some of those scabbed over wounds that maybe more mainstream interviewers don't know like where to pick the particular scab the same way.
Well, and there's also that element of code switching where
Mm,
there's a whole language to the, you know, sort of indigenous to adoption.
yeah,
Um, and just like any language, you can't just learn the words. You have to learn the world of that language so that because everything is relational. So when you're talking to another adoptee, you're speaking in like sort of a native tongue, even though it's a liminal tongue.
totally. Even though it's completely learned and always changing. And, you know, depending on where an adopted individual is in their context or journey or whatever you want to call it. Like they may not be familiar with those things. So I also wouldn't want people to feel sort of ostracized or marginalized from these conversations just because they're in like a different moment in their sort of revelatory journey.
Yeah, and that's something I kind of want to get to is like a bigger picture of adoption outside of literal human adoption. But while we're sort of talking about adoption as the way that our community understands it, what aspects of the adoptee experience do you think are still largely invisible in the mainstream?
That's, that's a difficult question because, I think that adoption, at least in the last 5 years, particularly when it comes to overseas adoption, I think has been addressed very differently than what I remember 10 years ago. What I think is under discussed, maybe still, is the fostering system and formerly fostered individuals. Probably more so in Canada, there's less thought given to immigration and migration status when it comes to overseas adopted individuals. And something that I think about a lot is like the post reunion experience in adoption and the psychological circumstances and consequences in some ways of having reunited. And that's not to say that reunion isn't, at its core, such an important part of many adopted individuals' experiences. But that's not the end of the story for many of us. And so I think that right now we're at a point maybe where we're starting to see a little bit of disruption to the white savior and or happily ever after narrative, but the answer isn't necessarily the reunion, right? It's more complicated than that.
Yes, there's still some de-Disneyfication to
Hmm.
go around. You know, it's not like, oh, and then you meet your blood and everybody runs off into the sunset.
Absolutely. It's not the solution to like the trauma that I think maybe a younger version of myself thought it might be. In fact, it just, in my experience, added different kinds of layers of complicated emotions to work through. And, you know, from my particular perspective right now, how do my relationships with my adoptive kin as well as my biological kin impact the kinship that I'm trying to establish going forward? And can I face those things fully and with integrity all the time?
Yeah, actually, it was the reunion process and returning to Korea that deeply informed the way I facilitate plant medicine,
Mm.
because that reunion was one of the biggest ceremonies that I'll ever have in my life. And it was so important to, like, I got to go through First Trip Home. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. They're an adoptee community in Seoul who just weren't down with the other sort of motherland tour opportunities, sort of like birthright Korea, if you will.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so they got government funding, but it got to be an experience, a way for Koreans to return to the homeland, do a family search if they want, a birth family search, without trying to convert you into some
Right.
sort of evangelicalism or something like that.
I mean,
And
or the nationalism that is connected to these like sort of land claim like context. Like so it operates in such a, especially today, like we know it operates in such a nefarious ideology. Like yikes.
yeah, so it was people who lived in Korea, knew that whole world and that whole system, and created this opportunity for adoptees to return to Korea without an agenda, just a group of people who are supporting your agenda. Whatever it is, let you have your experience of Korea and leave with whatever you want to take from it. Just this sort of non-narcissistic, if you will, take on Korea. They have no stake in how you feel about Korea or how you
Amazing.
feel about any of that. And so to me, it was really an ideal way of going back. But because I got to go in that container, I learned so much about how important the preparation was, how significant the integration was, and just how much information I needed before I just, even agreed in order for me to have conscious consent to
Mm-hmm.
go into that situation.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And so, yeah, so just there was a lot of overlap with that and plant medicine as well that
Cool.
really came into play. So, what does reunion mean for you now
Mm.
after the book? Like, what's deepened, what's faded, what's changed?
That's a great question, and it's something that I work through in my second book, which, as you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, it came out in Canada about 9 months ago. It's going to be released in the U.S. on August 26th, 2025, and it's a book of personal essays that's thinking through very not in a scholarly way, but in a brain forward way. Um, Adoption and reunion outside of some of the emotional heart work that was being done in the memoir. And one of the things that I'm thinking about, so one of the essays is called Rainbows, and it's about the kinds of rainbow families that are used in the liberal narrative. So queer rainbow families, but also like transracial adoption families, and deconstructing what ideologically we place into that, and how both of these kinds of families become these kinds of liberal props in different ways, and how we can challenge those narratives. And so in that essay in particular, I'm thinking about what happens after reunion, the relationships that possibly fail, because if one's core connection to people are genetics but also trauma, like inevitably there's going to be things that need to be unpacked, I think. Language and cultural differences add to that even more so, I think, and then distance and other kinds of barriers complicate relationships. So in that essay, but also throughout all of the essays, I'm thinking about how some relationships with my biological kin sort of petered off, how some of them ended quite abruptly because of decisions on different people's, in different people's minds. And how can one piece together the experience of having gone through a reunion, not regretting it, but understanding the recklessness of reunion from a somewhat cerebral perspective. So that's what this new book is about. What do you make? What do you make of it? What can be to poorly to poorly, use the analogy that Dion Brand uses in her brilliant new book, what can be salvaged after the wreckage of it all?
Oh, beautifully said. There's always this talk about nature versus nurture, and often feel that adoptees are like the singular best people to talk about that. What are
Yeah.
some of the things that surprised you about what is actually nature and what is actually nurture?
Um, I think what surprises me is that, and this is where the title of that new collection came from. It came actually, it's interesting that you ask about adopted individuals interviewing. It came from an interview that I did with another adopted individual who asked me, what does blood mean to you? What does genetics mean to you? What does family mean to you? All of these things. And my answer to each of those questions was it means everything and absolutely nothing. And that's where the title of this new book comes from, Everything and Nothing at All, which is to say that nature means absolutely everything for me as an adopted individual because it's the false myth of an answer as to why things are the way they are in my head, in my heart, all of those things. It also means absolutely nothing because I'm so socialized and very much so contextualized in my current place. So it's another one of those paradoxes where it means if either of those things were taken away, it would be like my whole sense of self would be thrown into flux. However, I also know that these are arbitrary, constructed, and mythical elements of the self.
Was there anything that stood out that was surprising to you? Like, oh, damn, that was nurture. Oh, damn, that's actually nature.
But I know it's scandalous, or I think it's scandalous. I'm trying to do some reading about it, about like perigenetics, like the things that are like have a genetic propensity, but then are triggered by a social thing. So I try to think about the world and in that way. But, so I'm working on a third life narrative right now, a third nonfiction, and it's about neurodiversity, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and OCD. And so now I'm thinking a lot more about nature and what is, for instance, is it my autistic anxieties that made me feel one way or another? Or was it the model minority myth that made me feel one way or another? Or was it being adopted that made me feel one way or another? Like there are just so many things that I'm going back now and thinking about this very question, what is nature, what is nurture? But from a perspective of like now there's this additional diagnosis and this additional layer of thinking. And of course I know neurodiversity is again both genetic and social conditioning. So I think what's surprising me now, the way that I'm thinking about things, is that there are things that are nature that aren't necessarily Korean, that they might just be like nature in my brain in and of itself. And how can I be autonomous from Korea being a sort of metonym for nature? And like, what is just like nature ontological to myself? So that's what I'm trying to work through right now. But I mean, the cheeky answer, of course, is like, damn, my mom's skin still looks really good. Like, and so, like, there's hope that when I'm 70, like, I'm gonna look snatched AF. So, so there's that part. And then there's the nurture part that's just like, oh, like, I eat potato chips with my bare fingers, not with chopsticks. So like I've been socialized to like eat snack foods in a very Western way, and I find it very awkward to do things like that in a very Korean way. So that would be my glib answer if you want to edit the other stuff out.
No, I love it. I love it all. Um, you spoke a little bit about trauma, and in relation to writing, how did you navigate writing about your birth family without collapsing into confession or trauma performance?
Mm-hmm. Um, Thank you for saying that I don't do that, because sometimes I'm caught, like I'm wary, or I feel that I have done those kinds of things. I always say to people that writing nonfiction is like the ultimate manipulative act. You become a professional gaslighter, in fact. And the point for me, I guess, is that maybe it is like a ASD trait that I don't feel traumatized writing about things. In fact, sometimes I'm more triggered reading parts of my life back or aloud. There are sections of my books that I won't read in front of a public because I just can't. And maybe that's also an expression of what it's like to be an actual lifetime reader and how impactful words are when consumed that way as opposed to expressed from one's own mind. So I don't really think about trauma in the act of writing that way. However, as I said, I have, as part of my toolkit, I guess, or I've learned to have these things, the literary devices to trigger emotions in a reader in a particular way and to present my speaker in a way that will be impactful, hopefully in the method that she's aiming to be understood or experienced. However, I want to be like 100% clear, like everything else in writing, like it's performative and it's a reflection of a character that is based on me. Absolutely. She's had the same experiences. She's trying to articulate through her voice how I, as a person, felt about certain things. However, she knows what she's doing. And she's doing it on purpose to elicit a kind of intimacy or a kind of distance at different points. And that's what I think, like how I approach nonfiction writing. It's like very methodical and it's very intentional. So yes, there are traumatic, yes, there are graphic moments, yes, there are intense moments. Um, but my speaker is, she would like to think she is in control of that presentation.
Yeah, I always said that the difference between fiction and nonfiction is fiction, you lie to other people, and nonfiction, you lie to yourself.
I love that. I tell my students in nonfiction, it's not that we tell the truth, we just try not to lie. So I think it's like a different iteration of the same thing.
Beautiful. You know, the story for so many adoptees and other outsiders is the unconscious belief in their disempowerment. Can you say a few words about your journey in finding permission to speak?
That's like a really timely question because I've been thinking a lot these last 24 hours, I think, about agency and not sovereignty and like the um, traditionally political sense, but like what does it mean to have control and what does it mean to like believe that you have control over anything really? Um, but I think that I grew up feeling very disenfranchised and afraid. And I've come to realize that most of my actions are fear driven and most of my responses are experienced as fear that I'm angering people, fear that something bad is going to happen. I mean, I would probably like be a little bit reckless not to anticipate a lot of fearful things, to be honest. But I never felt, I guess, after I became an adult, after I moved away and moved to a more multicultural space, I've been quite recklessly unapologetic, I think, about discussing my experiences and also talking about race, gender, sexuality, all of those things. And I'm not sure where it comes from, to be honest. And I'm not saying that it's like some marvelous thing because obviously it gets me in trouble, like often. But perhaps it comes from living in a different cultural context in Canada. It's very different, especially these days, I think, from what folks are experiencing in the US. There's still censorship. There are books that are banned up here too. Like we're still going through that kind of stuff. And we also have extremely far right wing, fascist almost political parties and definitely groups, like active groups in Canada. But I feel as though there's maybe because there are fewer of us, we're not perceived as a threat the same way or to the same degree. And maybe it is the benefit of being a Asian woman, femme presenting, all of these things, like my class presentation, all of those things that allows me to say things and not be castigated the same way as other people might be. And so I'm happy to take advantage or to use that privilege to do the things that I can do. But yeah, I never felt um, quiet about those things. But now there are people listening, so I guess that's the difference also. Like before, no one was paying attention, and it was just like screaming at a wall, like any other maybe frustrated person. But now people are starting to listen, so I feel like I need to be a little bit more mindful about how I approach things, but it's still the same stuff.
Yeah, managing a public persona
Mm-hmm.
is yeah, an interesting an
Yeah,
interesting conversation with the self.
absolutely. Yeah.
You had mentioned ontology
Mm-hmm.
earlier, which for people who are not philosophy nerds is the study of being.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you believe that the adoptee experience has its own philosophy, its own metaphysics of rupture and reintegration.
Maybe like because of course they're adopted individuals who don't want to even who are disavowing the experience of being adopted. So in that sense, I mean, different from being delusional, where like one just like I guess actively doesn't think about things, but to disavow being unable to psychologically even confront or experience those things, to even start to think about and unpack that. But I was talking to my therapist recently about adoption things, and he was saying, obviously, about the Freud family romance narrative, and for those who have rightfully like not read Freud, I guess it's the idea that every young child at some point goes through this phase where they wish or they imagine that they've been adopted and that their biological family is not their family because either they've been like in trouble or grounded or something, or like there's some sort of desire for like one day my true mother is going to come and get me and everything will be fine, and these like assholes who grounded me or took away my Nintendo will like they'll get it then, right? So Freud's family romance is supposedly something that every child goes through. And my therapist and I were pondering, like, what does it mean for a child for that to truly be part of one's experience, not just a fantasy, but like that there is someone out there, but they're not coming to get you. Or they can't find you, or they don't want to. How does that distinguish the adopted and formerly fostered individual's experience from supposedly the rest of society? And what does that mean in terms of feelings of attachment and security and emotional regulation? But just in that small fantasy of being able to imagine that out there somewhere is like a woman who's a princess and that's your actual mom and she's going to come and get you, that's not given to the adopted individual the same way. And so if in this bizarre like Freudian, atmosphere, all children go through this stage, then it tells me that there's something unique about adopted and or formerly fostered individuals that sets them apart. And maybe it's as early as that family romance stage.
Yeah, it's interesting because the adoptee envy is definitely
Mm-hmm.
real out there.
Mm-hmm.
So, what role has writing played in your healing from adoption trauma, or is it more complicated than that?
I think I'd like to credit writing as a sort of intellectual and emotional homecoming and a way of expressing all sorts of things that had been going on in my head for a long time that felt very uncomfortable in other genres, particularly academic writing. But I'm not sure that writing can actually be celebrated as something that cures something. It doesn't feel cathartic for me, for instance. It's not working through emotions. However, what it does do for me is when I read back the things that I've experienced, that my narrator like puts into words, it makes me feel as though I exist. And sometimes my life feels so surreal and absurd that it's like this, how you gaslight yourself and you're like, this can't possibly be true. Like, what is awake time and what is a sleep time? Like, what is going on? But I believe so deeply in words, I guess, that it validates those experiences when I read them back. And so the ability to write my experiences through my speakers' voices doesn't necessarily cure the trauma of the experience, but it makes me feel less alone. It's strange. It's like creating a community for yourself out of yourself. It's a very strange echo that's going on here. The other like beautiful thing that writing has offered me is a kind of community that is what I think I've been looking for, really, and that is other queer and or racialized individuals and or indigenous individuals who are making something and who celebrate one another through the act of appreciating the things that they are making. And because I feel very embraced and welcomed by, particularly in what is today known as Canada, in the place where I have citizenship, in those ways, it's given me a sense of belonging that I think I never felt in the adoptee community, that I never felt in just like straight up Asian Canadian or Asian diaspora communities, that obviously I never felt in Korean communities, that obviously I never felt in mainstream white communities and or straight communities and or like XYZ, right? Like we could go on forever. But the sense of marginalized, let's just say, individuals making something and loving one another for the things that they make and supporting one another for the most part for the things that they make has been quite the homecoming for me.
Yeah, the way I understand what you're saying is that you write yourself into being,
Exactly.
and that being finds authentic connection and community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kim,
Yeah. It's surprising, isn't it?
it's the reward for becoming who you are, I think,
Mm-hmm.
in life.
Because before I thought it was like if I get on an airplane and go over to another country, then then I'll figure out who I am. But that wasn't the case. Um, and it was, if I hang out with these people and drink soju and like eat jjigae, then I'll figure out who I am. But that wasn't the case. Um, and then it was like, if I get a job at a university and like talk about serious things all the time, then I'll feel connected. But that certainly was not the case. It was quite the opposite, actually, in that one. But it's in this place that I've truly felt seen and cared for and appreciated. Sometimes it's transactional. Don't get me wrong. It's like it's not this utopic thing. Um, Certainly, it's transactional because writing's like a part of like the capitalist mechanisms. However, um, it's something that I feel when I'm not able to write, I can feel my body like vibrating with a kind of tension. It doesn't have to be about adoption. It doesn't have to be about my personal experiences. It could be fiction. It could be whatever. But it's like my organs detach from my skin and they're just like floating around inside of me. That's what it feels like. It's uncanny.
Do you see your work as having a healing function for other adoptees, or what are some of the reflections that you've received from the community?
Yeah, people say that to me, and it's so touching and it's so beautiful and it's affirming and you know it's meaningful to hear those things. But it also makes me very sad. I can't remember if it's in Older Sister or if it's in Everything that my speaker says, like, I just love that there's so many of us, but I hate it too. I just hate that there's so many of us. I hate that there's anyone more than myself who feels the way that I do. I don't want that on anyone. And so so it's meaningful to hear those things, but it's also heartbreaking because I don't want us to be connected on this shared experience of this garbage thing that's happened to us. Like that sucks, right? Like I want us to be connected and feel close for different reasons than that. It's beautiful if it makes someone feel validated or seen, but it sucks that it takes a book by a stranger to have your feelings validated. Like that fucking sucks, right? Like and so it makes me happy, but it also makes me so profoundly sad at the same time. Sorry, that's like such a bad answer to that, but it's like I hate
No,
that we exist.
it's super real. We are born as wounds into this
Mhm.
world, but then there's that flip side of the grace that's also not a self
Mhm.
or a cure. It's a bit of a self that we're not the only one.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
You know,
at like different stages in our journeys, absolutely. That's like the thing that will save us and keep us going and encourage us to make things, encourage us to make art, encourage us to protest. Absolutely. But I don't want us to have to protest.
that's the ideal.
Right.
So you've written a novel now. So you've gone, is that not correct?
So I'm writing a novel
You're
right
writing a
now.
novel. Okay.
Yes. I've published several short fictions actually. I wonder if it's enough for a collection. Maybe I can sneak out another book that way. Um, but yes, I am at a stage, and I was having a conversation with my editor a couple months ago where it's like the time after this next book that's going to come out to move into fiction, I think. And I'm excited. I can't wait, to be honest. I'm really stoked about it because I don't want adoptee writers to fall into the same trappings that racialized writers more broadly and or indigenous writers and or queer writers fall into, which is the assumption that we can only write about our own selves, that we're not imaginative, that we're not creative, that everything we do is autoethnography. And so it excites me to be moving towards fiction. And there's some great examples of other adopted individuals who are writing fiction who are resisting that stereotype that we only write about nonfiction and that we have no imagination outside of our own experiences. So I'm excited, I think. Yeah. Scared, excited.
Well, I've never heard that. That's a new one. I didn't know that was a thing that was projected onto. Did you start writing this novel to heal something, to name something unhealable?
hmm Yeah, actually, that's a really astute question because it feels, even though it's fiction, it feels like the most intimate thing that I've worked on. I feel like fiction gives me a little bit of permission more so to talk about very painful things that still aren't done. In nonfiction, I feel like I'm working through things that are done in my life, so to speak. And so my narrator's talking about, she's at the stage where she's reflecting on the experiences. But in this piece of fiction, I'm working on something that's inspired by experiences in progress. And that feels scary to me because, one must relinquish control over what the narrative might be in that case. Or maybe the narrative's wrong. And so, you know, I'm excited but scared. And it's like, like when you're in grade school and your class, it's like I was in French school. So it's like there were like two French classes in my whole grade school. That for every grade there'd be like those two sessions, but it'd be like imagine like switching out of French and then being in like the general one and then just like your whole class changing. It feels like the rest of those classes are like fiction writers and like the nonfiction are those two French classes. So it's like a whole new cast of figures and mode of existing. So that makes me a bit apprehensive, but I'm excited.
I was going to ask why fiction now? Did
Mhm.
something in your story or in your spirit outgrow memoir or even escape it?
Mm. Um, I think I've always had the desire to write fiction because I love to read fiction. I don't read very much nonfiction, to be honest. And I want to be able to do the thing that I admire so deeply. And likely I'll return to nonfiction. Like, I mean, it's like a siren song. It always calls you back. At least for me, because it's so easy to do. Like, it's so fast, it's so easy, it's so intuitive to write nonfiction, I think, that it's not a sort of graduating out of nonfiction. It's like a desire to always be wanting to try something new. Like, I suffer from the hubris of thinking I can do everything. You know, those people who on like, I don't know, on TikTok are just like, today I'm going to like make this, and then it like looks terrible, but they're like, well, at least I tried. Like, that's, I suffer from that egoism that I think like if I put my mind to it, like probably it'll be fine, right? So, so I want that adventure. The short fiction I've written has been received well, and yeah, I want to write about more surreal things too, and not have to always be thinking about, you know, is my narrator presenting herself in a reliable way? Like, why and why not? Is it successful or not? Does it create too much distance? Like, is there enough story? Like, some of the conventions that we use in nonfiction writing, I want to try some other things. Yeah.
So it sounds like it was more growth as a writer,
Absolutely. Yeah,
like some different muscles. And
exactly. Try something new. Why not? What's the worst that could happen?
have you felt that as you write, because you said even the in writing fiction that something truer or more intimate can can surface. Did anything come through you, lines, images, sensations that felt dictated or even channeled that felt older than you?
I'm not sure. Like, maybe I'm doing it wrong, to be honest. Like, the the way that I write, I don't necessarily. I hear people give interviews and they're like, I live with the characters and I talk to them in my day-to-day life and I ask them, how do you want the story to end? Like, I don't do any of that. I very much focus on image, which is what I think I end up doing in nonfiction also. I'm very imagistic thinking and I unpack like what things look like. And those are the kinds of speakers and characters that I have. Now, that being said, one of the characters I think that I'm working on, like, and it always comes with the caveat that, like, when people talk about the books they're writing, like, it never is the book that shows up, 3 years later on bookshelves. But right now, I'm working on this character who's like maybe 20, and I'm trying to figure out how she would see the world, which is very different than someone my age who's 45 sees the world, and how she would think about race and what she would observe. And so I'm asking a lot of young people in my life what they would notice, and it's very different from what I would notice. And that's what I want to be focusing on, creating a character that people recognize as a young person because of what she's looking at and what she decides to tell the speaker. And so I guess that's what's being channeled through these things. But again, it's through the images that she notices, like, and how she notices them and what she thinks about them. But it's still very, very early stages. I need to get this nonfiction out. Like, um, that has to kind of be my priority right now. But yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, the passion is starting to move.
Absolutely. It's
Hmm.
definitely there. I'm like itching to get into this project, and my editors suggested that I work on both simultaneously, which I think is like a really cool thing for her to say because I think that some people would be very cynical about publishing and be like, quickly work on this, like get it out, let's sell. Like, but she always encourages me spiritually and emotionally, but also craft wise, like what she thinks is like best for me as a person and as a writer.
When you've written either on the project now or in the past, did you ever get the sense that your body knew something that your mind hadn't caught up with yet, and that the alchemy of writing surfaced that?
I mean, always. As in, I feel like I need things explained to me, like my own thoughts often, that I'll write something or I'll observe something. Um, and then here's a perfect example. So that essay that I was telling you about called Rainbows. Um, so originally this book of essays was 9 essays long with an introduction. It was really long. Now it's only 5. And at some point, I have 2 editors that I work with, and I don't remember, but I suspect they like teamed up because they work in the same offices. They were like, "We moved things around. What do you think about this?" And then an entire essay that was about transracial adoption and an entire essay that was about being pan polyamorous were brought together, and I was like, "Okay, like weird, but sure." Um, I did it because I trust them so deeply. They're so brilliant. Like I'm just like I don't know what like the like a cog in the machinery. But then when I was on book tour and like giving an interview, like it immediately clicked as to why they were together. And I was like, oh wow, like they're so fluffing smart. It makes me look like I'm very smart. And like all the flowers to all the editors who are like working in the backgrounds of these things. But I was like, oh, like that's the thesis of this. But it didn't come to me until long after. Like I had no idea. And so they were able to take the observations that I'd been making and the combination of memories and thoughts and reflections and whatever, and see something that they didn't tell me, like they didn't boss me, but then I realized what it was later. And so it was a combination of something inside of my brain and maybe inside of my fingers as I was typing it out or whatever, in my organs. I like to think about my organs when I'm writing. Something in my organs put these thoughts together, and then their brilliance that organized it into something coherent for me to actually figure out later, to learn from that act of them putting it together. So yeah, it happens all the time. I'm a very impulsive writer. I'm a very reckless writer. And so my brain has to always catch up later. And usually someone else is telling me like what I've said.
Yeah, it's like you write from intuition, you write from the gut, sounds like.
Yeah.
And sort of like, what was it? Like Ernest Hemingway, right? He says, right, drunk, edit sober or whatever. And like
Oh my God.
you write from that depth,
Mm-hmm.
and that might be why you can write, because so many people get in the way, right? Like they helicopter parent their
Mm-hmm.
creative process, and
Mm-hmm.
it paralyzes them. They can't get anything down on the page because they've, like, I told a friend, I said it reminds me of scheduling an abortion during foreplay. And
Oh my God, that's so het normie, but
I went there, what can I say?
yeah.
I code switch.
Okay, cool, 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 cool.
Um, but it sounds as though then people with that cerebral distance
Mm-hmm.
can, you let them do what they do,
Mm-hmm.
and make those connect, because that's not really your job. Your job is to be the artist,
Mm-hmm.
and other people can dissect it and figure out your
Oh,
psyche as it appears on the page.
mm-hmm. That's really helpful because I do find that um, I do a lot of like that. This feels like the thing to say in the moment in the act of writing, but then in the editing is when I come in with like a political mind, and then I'm like, okay, what needs to be filled in here so that I'm hopefully reducing harm, so hopefully I'm not doing anything politically against what I personally, that my speaker isn't like coming out of pocket basically, so that she's not doing something that would inadvertently be against what I as the writer politically believe in and want to be doing. And so it's like they're two different people in the room that way. And it is like in the editing stage when I come through and I'm like, okay, um, does she really need footnotes? Like she's gonna come off as seeming like so like weird and scholarly. Like I don't want her to be like that. Like that's when the brain comes in and brilliant guidance along the way. I don't show other writers my work. I don't show other people my work really, aside from my team, who are so helpful and brilliant enough as it is that it just excites me talking to them. Like my mind feels like it's like I don't know, exploded in a good way.
Well, it sounds like you've got a great formula.
I
Go.
mean, they're wonderful. I always joke. So one of my editors is like a Chinese Canadian person. One of them is a white woman. My agent's a white woman also. I'm like, you're like the only white ladies I like fully trust like 100% of the way. And I think they get like a kick out of that. I know they're not like triggered or anything. But it's like legitimate. Like it's such a intense dynamic, I think, for me.
Yeah, I mean, they're your book doulas.
Yeah, yeah, they're my people. I don't want to be like transferee or anything, but like I need to try to keep it legit. But yeah, it's very emotional for me, that part.
Well, it makes sense that they would make that connection that you are not only transracial, but that you're also transrelational.
hmm Yeah, absolutely. But we need to be very like conscientious of all of these things, like and emotionally intact. Because also like I find that like I have a kind of intensity that can put too much weight, more weight than other people have consented to carry in relationships. So I need to be very mindful of that.